Lesson 2, Economics, Class 12. Let's continue with Indian Economic Development, Chapter 1, which is Indian Economy on the Eve of Independence. Let's take a quick recap of Lesson 1. The first section under this was Low Level of Economic Development, and the 3 points under it are India had an independent economy, the twofold policy of the colonial government, and no sincere efforts taken by the colonial government to estimate the national income and per capita income. The second section is the state of agricultural sector, which is characterized by low agricultural productivity, land settlement system, revenue settlement, and commercialization of crops. The third section talks about the state of industrial sector. Now, decline of handicraft industries, lack of a sound industrial base, dearth of capital good industries, and contribution to the gross domestic product by the secondary sector was negligible, are the points under this section. We will continue with the remaining part of the chapter from the next slide. The fourth section is foreign trade, and the points under it are India had been an important trading center until the restrictive policies of production, trade, and tariff pursued by the British affected the structure, composition, and volume of Indian trade. Soon India became an exporter of raw silk, cotton, wool, sugar, and jute, and an importer of finished consumer goods like cotton, silk, woolen clothes, and light machinery. The second point, Britain had monopoly over India's export and import. As a result, more than half of India's foreign trade was restricted to Britain alone, while the rest of the trade was carried with China, Ceylon, and Persia. The third point, generation of a large export surplus. Even though there was a large surplus, essential commodities like food grains, clothes, etc., were missing. And the last point underneath this is drain of Indian wealth was brought about by gold and silver earned from the export surplus, which were being spent on setting up administrative offices for the British, expenses on fighting the World War, and import of invisible items. Now, the fifth section is the demographic conditions. The first census collected in British India was in 1881, which revealed the unevenness in India's population growth. Literacy level was less than 16%, with female literacy being lower than 7%. Water and airborne diseases were rampant, due to which people died in large numbers. Infant mortality rate was very high. Life expectancy was only 32 years, and extensive poverty prevailed. The next section tells us about the occupational structure. Now, the first point underneath this is that primary sector accounted for the largest share of workforce, with nearly 70 to 75% people engaged in the primary sector, while the manufacturing and service sectors accounted for only 15 to 20%. And the second point is the growing regional variation. While parts of Madras Presidency, which included the states of Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, and Kerala, Bombay and Bengal witnessed a decline on the dependence of workforce on the primary sector, there was a commensurate increase in the share of workforce in the primary sector in Orissa, Rajasthan, and Punjab. Now let's see the infrastructure. Some basic infrastructure like railways, post and telegraph, waterways, canals, etc., did develop, But the motive was not to provide amenities to the people, but to serve the selfish interests. Roads were built to mobilize army and draw out raw materials from the countryside to the seaports. There was shortage of all-weather roads to reach out in rural areas. Railways were introduced in India in 1850, which has been the most significant contribution. It helped people to undertake long distance travel and break cultural and geographical barriers on one hand, and enhance commercialization of crops on the other hand. But this adversely affected the self sufficiency of village economies. It also increased the volume of exports, but once again, the benefits from it hardly reached the Indian people. Besides railways, the colonial government took measures to develop inland waterways, which proved to be uneconomical, electric telegraph, which helped in maintaining law and order, and the postal service, which, though were useful for public purpose, remained inadequate. The eighth point is the positive contribution by the colonial government. From the above discussion, you can well make out the contributions by the Britishers, which have come long way in serving our country. For example, introduction of railways and commercialization of crops, etc. To conclude, we inherited a deteriorated, stagnant, and a crippled economy at the time of independence in 1947. There was a mammoth task before our policymakers to fight the social and economic challenges brought about by the 2 century long British rule. The Indian leaders indeed had to keep these challenges in mind while framing new economic policies to put the country back on the right economic track.